Alright, so I'm Graylin. This is the last time that I'll be presenting because I'm graduating, and so I figured I'd do something a little different and not talk about the software that I had been working on, which is still going, and we've done some cool things, which if people are interested I can talk about. But I actually also had a different open source project that I started up over winter break that is doing a lot better than I thought it would, and I guess as the number of people contributing grew, I realized I didn't really have a source, a place I could go and say, well, what are all these things I need and why do I need them? So I read a couple books. One in particular is really helpful, and so I made a checklist. So I'm going to sort of narrate that checklist over that project to see what I'm currently missing with relation to that. So, or at least what I was at the time that I made the last release. So I'll be applying the checklist to a small project that I started called SC2 Reader, which is on PyPy, which is the Python packaging index, which is how you distribute modules in Python. So some quick background on the project. I started over winter break, and then I kind of abandoned it because I guess I didn't really school and stuff was more important, but then one week I got two inquiries, one from a guy that was making a website that wanted to use it, and another guy that was doing something similar. One's in Finland and one was in Sweden, so I was like, this is really cool. I never worked with people in other countries before, so I got back into it, and now we've got a bunch of forks and watchers and people on the channel and on the mailing list and various different contributions. So all the items on the checklist are lifted from a great free book that you can find at this address called Producing Open Source Software. So thanks to him for making that disclaimer. I didn't write the book, I just read it, so I might be misinterpreting things that he said, and so just because it's on here doesn't necessarily mean that's how he intended it. But anyway, so he starts off, and we're going to go in kind of the order that he went in that. I just sort of compiled a checklist going back from it. So choose a good name, and this might not be as important, but is it clear what the project does? Is it easy to remember? Is it available for use? That's kind of important, but also kind of not important. Like you've got Cisco, the company that does the network, and you've got Cisco, the food company. So depending, it might not matter that it was also available, but you should make sure about trademarks, which are industry dependent, which is why they can do that. And are the domains available? So, So, let me. I can't click it. Oh, it's a PDF. Let's fail. Do you have a browser?
Yeah, go to Start menu. Yep. Chrome right there.
So this is what we're going to be looking at. It was only on PyPy and it was only on GitHub, so those are the two frontward-facing things available. So So choose a good name. Is it clear it does? It's clear that it reads StarCraft 2 stuff. It's easy to remember. It's available and all that checks out. So mission statement, and this sort of implies that you've actually got a mission statement for the project. If you don't, then you probably first want to acquire one. And he says, is it concrete? Is it limiting? Like you want to both establish your scope and limit it so that people coming across your project don't think it's going to do something, or want it to do something that you have no intention of it doing. So you want it to be limiting. Is it short? Does it require prior knowledge to understand the statement? So it's a library for extracting information, and it's also a documentation project. So it's pretty short, it's pretty clear, and it's also limiting in that it doesn't include doing derivative works like compiling statistics across things like that. So just give 5 out of 5 there. State that the project is free. A lot of open source projects on their front pages won't, just state that. So is it unambiguous? Is it linked? is the license in the repository, and he emphasized that you want to both have the license file and you want to have a reference to the license in every single file in the repository, just so that, again, it's very unambiguous. No matter where you're looking, it's clear. And is it a standard license? Because you don't want to just throw it around. So we check out pretty good there, except I don't have the license reference in every file, so I should probably do something about that. Feature requirements lists, and he thinks, so these are important because if someone comes, they want to know what it does and what it needs to do it. And he also says that it's important that your feature lists, that they not only contain things it currently does, but things that you're working on and things that it will, hopefully do in the future. And so that way people can get some sort of trajectory of where you're going to see if it fits with what where they're going as well. And if you do include those features, which he says you should, are they marked appropriately? And it is everything that you need in the requirements specified, because obviously it won't work otherwise. So we check out again there too. Just a basic install, an advanced install, and it's pretty easy with Python because you've got the whole setup tools kit and pip. So development status. So he also says that if you want people to, so you've got your feature list, but you also want to state, like I said before, the short-term goals. And interesting, new to me anyway, does it hold a history of past releases with feature lists and dates? And he says because it's important for people to know not just where you're going, but also be able to see in one place where you've come from and how fast you've gone there. So if you so having that would let people know that, okay, I release like once a month with like 5 features each release, or I release like, between every 1 and 12 months, and sometimes it's got 1 or 10 or 20, so it just helps people to understand that. Is it careful not to overpromise, and does it state what types of developers are needed? Which is important because people might want to contribute, but you might not need them, and so why waste anybody's time there? So I did really bad on this. I didn't state any goals. I just sort of said this is what the package does, and then I called it a day. So downloads, is it downloadable as a package like a zip or a tar or something like that? Because not everyone's going to want to use version control. Does it conform to standard build and installation methods? Like once they get it, can they configure and make it, or pip install it, or do something that's sane, or is it going to be incredibly difficult? And then do you version properly so that people can understand what each download represents? Developer access, is the version control system and the bug tracking system accessible and also anonymously? Some people might not necessarily want to be, have to log in and give you an email and everything to do that sort of stuff. And then communication channels. Do you have a mailing list? Do you have an IRC channel? And both are really important because, and especially I found this out because now I've got people in Australia and Europe and the US. And so with all those time zones, it's impossible to actually just sit down and chat with them. So you need to have a mailing list, if only because that way you guys don't have to be all in the same place at the same time. But IRC is great because when you're trying to work something out, you can fix it in like, a fraction of the time if you can just chat and hash it out. So, and then also I ran into, even when I had them, was it clear that when you would be there? Because people in Australia, they're not going to know what time zone I'm in, so they might go on the channel and be like, no one's there. So being able to set, saying that, I'm on the East Coast, so these are probably the times I'll be there, was really useful. Developer guidelines. So this is something that I was failing miserably in, and it's cost me a lot of time because I basically have to go over it every single time someone reaches out. Does it point to the communication channels, in this case the mailing list and IRC? Are there instructions on how to report bugs? Do you have a certain set of information that they need to supply, like what their build and their setup and their operating system and everything? Are there instructions on how to submit patches? Let's say they fix something. Do you want a patch? Do you want them to fork it and issue a pull request? Do you want them to just paste it in an email or talk about it? And then what sort of decision-making style is there? Like, is it a dictatorship where, I'm making the decisions, or is it like a voting sort of process? And I kind of ran into that a few times as well, and that caused a lot of problems. And then the other big thing is just documentation. Documentation is just like a huge topic that, he doesn't go into all the way, but says that there are some baselines. So any documentation needs to state what you should know before you start the documentation, so people don't get frustrated with not being able to make progress. And that it should at bare minimum include the process of setting it up and also something that they can do to make sure it was successful. So in our case, we're using you just run the test suite, and if it passes, or if we know that this many of them pass, so as long as they can confirm that it's working as it does in your system, then that's something that's really good also. Does it have an overview and examples for showing how to perform the tasks? This is something that I didn't put enough time into either, and so there's a lot of confusion there. So it's surprising, so even though like it might be a small project, a surprising amount of people will not open the source to see how things work. So I had this one guy who was trying to use it based on some like example scripts, and he didn't realize that this thing that was printing out as a string was actually a class that had like all these variables. So he was using regex on the string to pull out all the different pieces of it, of the representation. And it was maybe silly on his part, but it was also I could just have had some documentation demonstrating that fact, and that would have been great. And then, our incomplete or out-of-date area is clearly labeled as such, because it's not just a project. In my case anyway, it wasn't just to parse it, it was also to document the format that it's in, so where all the byte codes are and things like that. And a lot of times things will fall out of date, so you need to sort of mark it so that people, it's better to have some information in there than no information in there, but if it's wrong, you need to mark it as such, otherwise there's frustration. And he also really emphasizes an FAQ, even if it's only got one thing on it. He says having that there will start the process of building it up, and it'll save you a lot of time in the long run. And then, are the docs easily accessible online? And pretty much everyone does this, because nowadays even small projects will do wikis or something. But he really emphasizes to also be able to have it packaged with your source code, and that's something that is really difficult if you're going the wiki route, because a lot of times you can't just download wikis into a directory. So it's something that we're dealing with. And a lot of documentation will have a search box that's powered by Google or something nowadays. But he says that the simplest way to do it is just have some batch process that compiles it, all the pages of the documentation into this super long HTML page so that people can just use the browser find feature. And that made a lot of sense. So anyway, going through the checklist after I compiled it, I realized, which I partly already knew, that guidelines and documentation and developer status were really deficient. And of course, when I was supporting people and introducing people to the project, that's where I wound up spending all my time. And if I, probably in the time that it took me to bring 2 people up to speed, I could have actually reduced that to save me work on everybody else. So that was cool. So anyway, so that's it, but some open questions, I guess. Is this checklist useful? I went through it and I thought to myself, going through it made it really obvious where I was deficient and where I would see problems. So I think it's useful in that extent. It's certainly not complete. There's a lot of, there's tons and tons and tons of different things that you need to think about, which is why I thought the checklist would be useful in the first place, because if there's that many things to check about, you can't be expected to remember them all and think of them all. So just write them down and go through the list. It's what surgeons do. It's what pilots do. You could do it as a software person too. And then, are there tools that can help? Because a lot of the things are very tedious. So, what I guess the next step would be looking for tools that can, facilitate, checking off lots of those things at once. once. So, like maybe something that, pops out like a wiki, mailing list, and issue tracker, like version, like GitHub, for instance, accepts. So GitHub, when you sign up, you get version control, wiki, issue tracker, and those are, publicly accessible and anonymously. So it gets you a few at once. But anyway, so I guess thank you all, and RPI and RCOS and Morthy and Sean O'Sullivan for the funding. I came a long way in the last 2.5, 3 years being here, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Next year, if the New York State Senate does not pass the budget in time, you can complain. We know who to complain.
Yeah.
It's going